Alrighty. Thanks again, everyone, for coming out today. So Brent gave a nice introduction on what Exponent is and what we're doing. I'm going to dive a little deeper and talk about something that's kind of near and dear to my heart, which is mobile navigation. So who am I? I'm Skevy. My name's Adam, actually. You can call me Skevy. It's my Twitter handle. That's why I put an @ in front of it. I also work at Exponent, as you may imagine. And what did you say? I'm qualified to give this talk because I wrote the navigation library that I'm going to talk about. All right. So we're focused at Exponent on making mobile development easier, and specifically mobile development with JavaScript. And so a big part of mobile development is navigation. It's pretty near and dear to my heart. I've spent a lot of time thinking about mobile navigation, and navigation is in a mobile app is a lot more complicated than it looks. It may seem like a solved problem to the kind of layperson, but really it's pretty complex. So as a user, as mobile users, we take the navigation patterns that we use every day for granted. We expect smooth animations, apps that are easy to navigate. As developers, though, especially if you're a native mobile developer, APIs like UI Navigation Controller on iOS or Activities and Intents on Android are built-in functionality, right? And so even though super custom behaviors can sometimes be a pain, generally navigation, it just works, right? You don't have to think about it very much. But everyone in the room knew about React Native, right? So you guys all know that React Native is relatively new. And so there's been kind of constant churn in navigation solutions. When React Native launched, the two solutions provided by the React Native team were Navigator iOS, which integrated directly with UIKit, but only worked on iOS, so Android users were out of luck. But there was also Navigator, which was a pure JavaScript implementation that worked cross-platform. And it was pretty easy to grok if you looked at the API. But it soon kind of reached its limits when you started to use multiple navigators and you needed to coordinate transitions between them. So being an open source community and now a pretty vibrant one, tons more solutions popped up. You have React Native Router, React Native Custom Navigation, React Native Navigator, React Native Navigation. Some of these were complete reimplementations of the JavaScript Navigator. Some of them wrap the JavaScript Navigator, and others, such as React Native Navigation by Wix, had a similar goal to something that Airbnb is also working on right now, and they wanted to expose each platform's native navigation functionality to React Native. So they bridged view controllers and activities. So my colleague, James Ide, sitting over there in the corner, this is his favorite picture of himself, by the way. He wrote this route-based wrapper around the JavaScript Navigator about a year and a half ago or so. And it was called XNavigation. It was opinionated, it was route-based, it provided a really simple way to provide custom functionality in the navigation bar, and it had the ability to hook into things like on-will focus and on-will did blur and on-will blur and on-did blur events, so that you could perform some custom things there. I was supposed to go through that, my bad. But unfortunately, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. And I'm going to shit on your navigation library a little bit, James, but I love you. So hard to customize animations. Boo was pretty sad about the hard to customize animations. Did it have built-in back button support? No, Boo was sad about that too. Did it have tab-based navigation? It couldn't handle that. You needed something like React Native Tab Navigator. Didn't have anything that let you do URL-based routing. You had to, implement something like that, yourself. And perf, and this wasn't James's fault, I promise. It's similar to some of the other JavaScript navigation solutions. in that it didn't have native animations. If you're doing data fetching while you're navigating, it was going to drop some frames. Boo was definitely sad about that too. And like I said, it depended on this JavaScript Navigator that was built into React Native that was pretty stateful, and it had a lot of it was imperatively written, and it just wasn't a good time. So started working on when I started working at Exponent, I started working on this app that we built that Brent mentioned called List, and it's a very large, complex application. I mean, it's somewhere around 50,000 lines of code or something like that. So it's pretty big. And our challenge was to write that application completely in Exponent with JavaScript, right? Without dropping down to native. But we were expected to still retain that native performance and experience. So we originally wrote the app using XNavigation, and it was working okay. But we ran into some of its limitations, and we needed a better, more cohesive solution. So a while ago, when I started thinking about this problem, one of my original ideas on how to solve it was to think about how navigation was done on the web. And on the web, solutions like React Router, the Ember Router, things like that, they provide a really simple abstraction to deal with complex navigation flows. And I was thinking, well, what if we could use React Router in the context of React Native? What if every screen had a URL? It sounded fantastic in theory, but I realized that I was wrong, and that really mobile navigation is quite a bit different of a problem space than navigation on the web. On the web, everything has, every screen has a URI associated with it, which can sometimes be done on mobile, but you can't always rely on that. There's sometimes inferred navigation that needs to happen when you go to a specific place in your app. Navigation on the web is typically fully hierarchical, and that doesn't always fit with mobile either. And on the web, there's really no concept of nested navigation stacks, which you find all the time on mobile. When you go to a different tab, when you're tapping on a tab bar at the bottom, or if you have a modal come up that has its own navigation inside the modal, there's all of these, there's all of this nested navigation. And on the web, you have a back button and a forward button, and that's what you care about. So this made me conclude that we needed a different kind of solution, something similar to XNavigation and API, because that's something that I thought was really, really great. But we needed something that solved its limitations. So around the same time that I was thinking about this problem when working on List, Eric Vincenti from Facebook merged his navigation RFC project into React Native Core and call it Navigation Experimental. And this library aimed to address many of the problems that the original pure JS Navigator had. And it used a Redux-like pattern to manage navigation state. It provided support for nested navigation, more complex animations, tab navigation, et cetera, et cetera. But after taking a look at the API, it worried me a little bit. I realized we really needed a higher level of abstraction. Navex provided the building blocks, but we still wanted route-based navigation, a simpler API, something that was easy for developers to use. We didn't want people working on apps with complex navigation to have to understand and write navigation reducers, which is something that Navigation Experimental requires you to do, in order to get a great navigation experience in their app. So I set out to write XNavigation. That's key. It's not XNavigator, it's XNavigation. I know, I'm the world's best namer. It's an opinionated navigation library, similar in some ways to XNavigation, in that it's route and screen-based and provides a similar API. But it's completely rewritten and supports much more, including, but not limited to, tab navigation, sliding drawer navigation, sliding tab navigation, modals, out-of-the-box Android back button handling, co-located navigation configuration, It's typed with Flow, which is really useful if you use Flow or want to start using Flow. We have some prototypes for URL support. We use it a little bit in List, but that's something we could build out more. But the code behind it is set up to support that. And then we're also working on shared element transitions, which is something coming soon. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So the kind of key concept that I focused on when writing XNav was the concept of screens. You can fundamentally think of all mobile apps this way, I feel like. A screen can be navigated to potentially from anywhere in the app. And so what do I mean what do I mean by this? So imagine a typical tab-based mobile app. On the home screen, you have a feed, and you can tap into an item on the feed or into somebody's profile, pretty normal. But then you go to the Notifications tab, and you tap on a notification that somebody posted a list. You can tap to view the list, or tap to view the person who posted that list. And so the key concept here is that the profile screen or the list detail screen, they can appear on any tab in multiple places in your application within pretty much any navigation stack. Mobile navigation is very dynamic in that way. So looking at some code here, when you're defining the routes in your app in XNavigation, your routes are actually your React components. So, like I said, it's screen-based. So how are you building your screens? You're building them with React components. So that's all you need to do to define a route. And then within the component itself, you define this static route property. Like I said, route configuration is co-located with your component. And so we're borrowing like an idea from Relay, if you're familiar, where Relay co-locates data needs with their components. We're trying to co-locate navigation needs with a component. And then you notice that our title and our right button here in this example can be completely dynamic and based on route parameters. You can also control the left button here, or even render a completely custom navigation bar if you'd like. Navigating between screens probably looks pretty familiar if anyone has used Navigator, XNavigation, or anything like that, if they have used React Native. The API here is intentionally kept imperative for simplicity's sake, but underneath this imperative user-facing API, it's a completely declarative, data-driven navigation state tree. Tab navigation comes out of the box. That's not something you don't need to install another package, and you don't need to worry about dealing with another library or integrating it back with some other navigator. You just render the tab navigation component, and then render the tab items within it. And then notice how you can nest navigation components, in this case stack navigation, within a tab item. And the way this works is that the navigators are self-aware. They know where they live in your component hierarchy. And they understand, based on that component hierarchy, whether or not they're the child of another navigator, or whether or not they should act differently due to that constraint. One specific piece of functionality where it's very important that different navigators in your app are aware of each other is when handling the Android back button. On Android, the back button goes back not just in the current navigation hierarchy, but also back through tabs if you're using a tab bar. And then eventually, when it's at the very beginning of the navigation history, it completely exits the app. That's something you get for free when you're doing native Android development, but on React Native, you have to handle that stuff manually. And XNavigation understands and accounts for that behavior and provides it out of the box. I mentioned animations earlier. So that's something we take really seriously with XNavigation. One of the main complaints of JavaScript-based navigation libraries in React Native is that they don't match the native look and feel of the host platform when animating between screens. And this tends to happen for two reasons. Either incorrect animation curves that are different from platform native animation curves. And that's something that we've spent a little bit of time on with XNavigation, and we're going to spend more time on. But that's actually the easier part of the problem. The harder part of the problem was dropping frames on that navigation transition, like I had mentioned that earlier. So in the latest versions of React Native and in the latest SDK versions of Exponent, there's full support for offloading animations off the JavaScript thread. What that means is that prior to this work, frame droppage would happen due to the fact that the JavaScript thread, a little bit of background, React Native has, well, for the sake of this conversation, we can think of it as two main pieces of how the application gets executed. A main thread where your rendering is happening, and then the JavaScript thread where all the JavaScript is running, your React components are being parsed and run, your data fetching is happening there, et cetera, et cetera. So that JavaScript thread tends to be pretty busy. And with the animated API that is included with React Native, that was all implemented in JavaScript, which means that basically as you're fetching data, as you are rendering React components, if you are also calculating every frame of an animation, that tends to overload your JavaScript thread and you're going to drop frames. But the cool thing about it is that that animated API was written in a way that you can still write your animations in JavaScript, but you take those animations and you offload them off the JavaScript thread so that you are running your animations on the main thread, and while your JavaScript thread continues to work and fetch data and all of that. And that kind of lends itself to buttery smooth, 60 frame per second, 1080p, ultra, crazy first-person shooter type animations. So, yeah. That's an interesting question. So there was some experimentation by the React Native, the question. The question was, can you use web workers to offload some of the work you're doing on the JavaScript thread so that maybe you don't have this problem? And so there was some work done by the React Native team to explore using web workers in React Native. And really the issue with a web worker, even though you can offload work to it, you incur this cost of spinning up another JavaScript context, which can take quite a bit of memory. And so if you imagine spinning up multiple web workers, which is something you usually do when you're using web workers, basically the cost of spinning them up and dealing with them and then tearing them down and spinning them up again ends up like outweighing the other costs. So great question. So XNavigation aims to provide a super smooth set of defaults, of sane defaults, but also allows itself to be fully customized. So we often get questions of like, how can you override the tab bar and the navigation bar and like do custom functionality there? And XNavigation provides for that, but still exposes the hooks that you need in order to retain the underlying navigation functionality. And another kind of customization point that often happens is, say you have some screen in your app where you want to override the back button handling on Android specifically, so that maybe you pop up a little question that says, hey, do you want to discard your changes or save your changes or cancel? All you have to do is include the Android back button behavior component in that component that you're writing that logic in, and the Android back button behavior component knows what Navigator it's within and understands like whether it's focused on screen, et cetera, and will just handle that for you. And so it allows a really easy way to customize that. XNavigation also uses Redux under the hood. So it's super simple to integrate navigation state from XNavigation into your own Redux store in order to be able to react to navigation events in ways we haven't thought of yet. You don't have to integrate it with your own store. It can use Redux completely opaque to you, but there's the option of using your own Redux store. And then I mentioned shared element transitions. So this is something I'm particularly excited about. Thanks to an idea from this guy, Leland Richardson from Airbnb, who's actually implemented this functionality in their app, albeit slightly differently. We're soon going to support custom shared element transitions, which allows you to do, I say, Airbnb-like transitions between two screens. So this is what I'm talking about. You can see that when we tap on a listing here, the photo enlarges and animates itself to the new position. It's really pretty. And the idea here is that we want to make that really simple and easy to do, and so you can create these beautiful experiences in your apps and not have to write hundreds of lines of custom code. So we'll actually be able to do some of this stuff completely automatically by just wrapping one component in a shared element on one screen and wrapping another component in a shared element on another screen, and it will figure it out and automatically transition between. But then we'll also provide hooks where you can write custom transitions. This particular one does a crazy thing where it's sliding the tab bar and the cells underneath the Napa Valley one that I tapped on, and the historic bungalow and the navigation bar also gets slid up. So it's like doing this really crazy animation. We hope to be able to support something even as intense as that. Yep. The question was, is that based on CSS3 keyframes? No, it is not. It's actually dropping down, like behind the scenes. There's native code that is measuring the views in their initial position and their final position, and it's using that same animation API that I mentioned before that we've offloaded into native land, but it's using that same ability to be able to transition between the two. So yeah, use it. XNavigation aims to be a full-featured and flexible navigation library for any Exponent or Greenfield React Native application. We'd like to actually, this doesn't necessarily apply to Exponent, but one thing that is starting to get more common in the React Native community is for people to be implementing pieces of React Native, pieces of their app in React Native. And so you need, if you're going to do that, you need a navigation solution that can basically understand that it's only part of an app and not the entire app, and be able to easily transition between native to React Native back to native again. And so we're looking into ways where we can make XNavigation pluggable so that you can, if you have that use case, you can still use the XNavigation API, which I like to think is pretty nice, but have a different kind of implementation under the hood that fits in with your brownfield React Native app. So our hope with XNavigation is that it becomes kind of a one-stop shop for navigation in React Native and Exponent. So come check it out on GitHub and give it a try. Thanks. Of course. Yeah. So the question was, do we provide any extra components on top of what React Native offers? And the answer is yes. We do have. We try to make sure our navigation bar and our tab bar and things of that nature have a pretty good experience out of the box. And that's something we're continuously trying to improve. We also have drawer navigation built into this as well. So if you are building an Android app and need drawer navigation, or if you want to do it on iOS for some reason, you shouldn't do that though, because that's bad UX practice. But you have that ability. And the key there, though, is like we're going to continuously improve on the out-of-the-box experience, but at the same time, like we also are focused pretty heavily on making sure it's easy to customize, because most apps, it's like you can use the out-of-the-box components, right? But to really make it a customized experience, right? You're going to want to change those in some meaningful way. We do have hooks, though, if you only need to change small parts of those components. We do have hooks where you can just like, hey, change the background color of the navigation bar, things of that nature. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Thank you.